Somewhere beneath the sands of southern Iraq, buried under thousands of years of silence, lies a record of the most catastrophic war ever described by human hands. A war that was not fought between men, but between the beings who, according to the oldest written texts on Earth, created men in the first place. The cuneiform tablets that describe this conflict are real. They have been translated, studied, and cataloged by some of the world's most respected scholars. Now they sit in museums in London, Chicago, and Philadelphia right now. And what they describe, if taken at face value, rewrites everything we think we know about the origins of civilization, about power, about creation, and about the terrifying question of what happens when something is brought into existence that was never supposed to exist at all. What triggered this war? Something that the texts themselves suggest was not just unexpected, but cosmically, structurally, fundamentally impossible. And yet it happened. If you're ready to descend into one of the oldest, deepest mysteries humanity has ever recorded in stone, you're in exactly the right place. And you'll want to stay until the very end. Because the final piece of this puzzle changes the entire picture. Picture the year 1872. A scholar at the British Museum named George Smith is working his way through a collection of ancient clay tablets, thousands of years old, found excavated from the ruins of Nineveh in what is now northern Iraq. The tablets are covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks. Cuneiform script, the world's first writing system, developed by the Sumerians around 3200 BCE. Smith is translating methodically, dutifully, line by line, when something stops him cold. He reads a passage describing a great flood, a man chosen to survive, a boat, animals, the entire surface of the world erased and reborn. He had just found the flood narrative that predated the biblical account of Noah by at least 1,000 years. Smith reportedly leaped up, ran around the room, and began tearing off his clothes in sheer, uncontrollable astonishment. But here's what they don't tell you about that moment. The flood tablet was not the most unsettling thing hiding in that collection. It was not even close. The tablets that truly challenge our understanding of history are not the ones describing the flood, and they're the ones describing what caused it. Specifically, who ordered it? And more specifically, the catastrophic, nearly incomprehensible reason that order was given. Because according to multiple ancient Sumerian texts, real documents, verified, translated, housed in the world's greatest museums, the Great Flood was not the beginning of a story. It was the desperate, last resort ending to one. The ending to a war so devastating, so fratricidal, so cosmically wrong, that one faction of the ruling divine council decided the only solution was to drown the entire civilization they had spent thousands of years building. And the question that haunts every serious researcher who has spent time with these tablets is this: what could possibly have triggered a conflict that severe? What event, what act, what revelation shattered the divine order so completely that total annihilation seemed like the rational response? What if the trigger wasn't a political dispute, a power struggle, or a military provocation, but something far stranger? Something that, by all the laws these beings operated under, should never have been possible? The word Anunnaki appears in Sumerian texts more than 400 times. This is not a marginal reference. This is not a fringe annotation tucked into a footnote. The Anunnaki are named, titled, assigned specific roles, given specific cities, and described in extraordinary procedural detail across dozens of independent texts composed over a span of more than 2,000 years. The word itself translates, roughly, as those of royal blood, or the princely offspring. Though some researchers, including the late scholar Zecharia Sitchin, have argued for a translation closer to those who came from heaven to earth. Sitchin's 1976 book, The 12th Planet, proposed that the Anunnaki were not mythological constructs, but literal extraterrestrial beings who arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. Academic Sumerology largely rejected this interpretation. But even the mainstream scholars, Samuel Noah Kramer, Thorkild Jacobson, and others who dedicated their careers to rigorous translation, had to acknowledge something deeply unusual about these texts. The Anunnaki are described not as gods in the abstract, a spiritual sense, but as physical beings. Beings with appetites, with political ambitions, with siblings and rivalries and rage. Beings who got tired, beings who argued, and beings who, at a specific point in the narrative of these texts, went to war with each other in a way that tore their entire structure apart. Could it be that the ancient Sumerians were not writing theology? Could it be that they were writing history? History of a kind we don't have a category for yet? The ancient city of Nippur, located roughly 150 kilometers southeast of modern Baghdad, was the religious center of the Sumerian world. It was the city of Enlil, the commander of the Anunnaki, the lord of the air and sky, the figure the texts describe as the supreme authority in the divine council. The University of Pennsylvania conducted major excavations at Nippur beginning in 1888, and what they found there was staggering. Tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets, one of the largest concentrations of ancient written material ever discovered. Many of those tablets described Enlil in terms that are almost impossible to separate from the language of a real, functioning political administration. He held councils, he issued commands, he received reports from subordinates, he made decisions about humanity's fate with the calm, deliberate precision of a CEO reviewing a quarterly report. And one of his most consequential decisions, according to the Atrahasis epic, a genuine Babylonian text with clear roots in even older Sumerian tradition, was the decision to destroy humanity entirely. But why? The official line in the text, the surface explanation, is that humans had become too numerous and too noisy. Their clamor prevented Enlil from sleeping, and so he tried to reduce their population, first with plague, and then with drought, then with famine. And when none of that worked, he brought the flood. Here's where it gets strange, though. Scholars have read that explanation for generations and generally accepted it as mythological allegory, a way of explaining natural disasters through divine agency. But some researchers have looked at the same passages and felt something else, something that doesn't quite fit. Because the noise justification is, by any rational standard, wildly disproportionate to the response. You don't commit planetary genocide because you can't sleep. Even in the logic of ancient mythology, that explanation feels thin. It feels like a cover story. It feels like the kind of vague, easily digestible justification offered when the real reason is something you cannot, under any circumstances, allow to be put into writing. What if Enlil's true motivation for wanting to destroy humanity was not annoyance? What if it was fear? To understand what he might have been afraid of, you have to go back further, to the conflict that preceded the flood story by an entire act of the drama. The conflict between the Anunnaki and the beings who served them. The Anunnaki were not alone. According to multiple Sumerian texts, including the Atrahasis epic, they commanded a class of lesser divine beings known as the Igigi, sometimes translated as the Watchers or those who observe and see. The Igigi are described as workers and laborers. The Anunnaki arrived on Earth with a mission, and the Igigi were assigned to carry it out physically, digging canals, shaping the land, performing the relentless, exhausting, back-breaking work of terraforming a planet. The Atrahasis text is explicit about this arrangement. The Igigi dug the Tigris River. They dug the Euphrates. They worked for 40 periods of years, Belu in the original text, units of time that remain debated by scholars until the work was finished. Thus, picture that scale of labor. The rivers that still run through Iraq today, the rivers that gave birth to the first cities, the first agriculture, the first writing. According to these texts, they were not natural formations. They were dug by beings who eventually reached a breaking point. And then something happened that no one in the divine council had apparently anticipated. The Igigi put down their tools. They burned their digging implements. They marched in the middle of the night to Enlil's temple at Nippur, and they surrounded it. 40,000 of them, or something close to that number according to the text, standing in the darkness outside the temple of the Supreme Commander, demanding that their labor conditions be renegotiated. This is not a metaphor. This is not a spiritual allegory. This is, word for word, a labor strike.